Hello, I'm Dr. William Bond. This is another Bond report. This one's called Dad. It's about my dad. I gave a talk about him at one of our ophthalmology meetings many years ago, and that's new and improved. I just wanted to get going with it. There was a thing with the father, they said breadwinner also, but provider, protector, teacher, example. And this is what you try to be to your own kids. You hope you do as good a job as mine did. Basically, people, certainly males, go through 3 stages of life. My daddy can whip your daddy. Dad, you don't know anything, my father used to say. That's the 3 stages of life. This is my dad. We look like we're on the cast for Mad Men. My brother Brian is there. Dad's in the middle trying out for Mad Men. He worked for Caterpillar Tractors pretty much his whole working life once he gets started. Brian's going to play some cricket that afternoon. This is Australia, and these are school uniforms. You've got to wear those for school. I would be either a freshman or sophomore, which to them is, got to think about that, 3rd or 4th form, and we're on our way to school. And Dad had stopped by. He normally left early. Stonewall Jackson, of all people, said this the best. He was an indifferent math teacher, but a very good general. Said people who have happy houses seldom turn out badly. Happy homes. I practice in Peoria and Pekin, Illinois, where my dad worked for Caterpillar for many years, not the entire time. We were transferred regularly. I went to high school in Australia. We lived in several places in the United States. They changed places, but I get a lot. I used to get a lot more things, and people would tell me, I know your father, this, that, this, and that. You know, you kind of remind me of him, and I can be paid no higher compliments. I used to say that for years. This is just Dad and I. Now, when I'm starting as a little kid, there was no option. Dad, I didn't get to go to school. I didn't get to go to school. I didn't go to the university. We didn't have the money. But I want you do this. You listen to me. You know, I can close my eyes and hear this. You listen to me. Be a doctor, be a lawyer, them bastards, you got it made. I close my eyes and hear that. As the French say, the banker is a provider from God. Dad worked for Caterpillar for 40 plus years in these old-time factories. Starting out, he started as a foreman and went to their apprentice course, then substituted for college, and he spent his life, helping make yellow tractors. This is castings and forgings was his specialty. But I'm talking about parenting skills here and how I knew Dad. He didn't talk about work very much, but this is me. I am 9 years old or whatever I was, and I'm crying on his shoulder. Well, probably wasn't crying, but I'm bitching about something, saying something to Dad. He hears me out and he said, well, listen, it's okay to do that because I'm in your family and tell me, but don't ever tell anybody. Don't ever tell anybody your trouble. Half of them don't give a damn, and the other half are happy you're having trouble. And this was from the heart. This wasn't something he thought up to say. This was Lord Chesterfield's letters to his son. Don't pay any attention to that. Nobody gives a damn how you feel. Never tell anybody how you feel unless they ask you, and if they ask you, say fine. Big on this. You get hit by a bus tomorrow, everybody else's life goes on just about the same, and the number of people at your funeral depends mostly on the weather. Now I have heard these probably the low hundreds of times, probably not thousands, but I thought they were original with him because he wasn't shy with them. You tell him anything, I'd say this now. It's something if he died last year, and I would say something to him, remember, I'll tell you what, remember this, in 10 years, you won't care, I won't care, no one will care. In fact, most people don't care right now. And in fact, I'd add for this, and it got to be, not only do I not care right now, not only does not anybody care, I don't. I know I don't. So that was him. Here's another one of Dad's. If you sleep too much, it'll make you stupid. I've wondered about that a few times when I've woken up, and for all I know, he thought that. If you sleep too much, it makes you stupid. There's a John Wayne thing when he's in the Cowboys where one of the kids is looking back and kind of this and that, and John thinks something's the matter. He leans down to the kid, do you see anything back there? Well, gee, they were just leaving, and they'd not. Yeah, so that's what you see when you look back, huh? Well, don't look back. We ain't going that way. I'll spare you my John Wayne imitation, but Dad was always a rich source of phrases. He was a country boy, And, a mouthful of, he dealt with somebody, what did he get? All I got there was a mouthful of feathers. The guy was a feather merchant. And the big time someone is a verb. Well, I went down there and they were big timing me. And that would be, they were acting like they couldn't be bothered with his problem or something. I use that one myself and don't even know it. I'm probably not in the dictionary. I found this out later on with a Kentucky good friend of mine, a job of work. He'd say, this is when I'm 18 or 19, and I say to Dad, gee, I'd like to get a car. You're promoting something for nothing. And Dad said, I had a car when I was your age. I think that's a good idea. Go get yourself a job of work and get yourself a car. And dead cold serious. So I did do that. I got myself a job of work and got myself a car. Now, I thought that was just a country locution, that these people just happen to say that. And this Kentucky guy brings me up. He says, no, a job of work is a very specific thing. A job of work is if you did a job, but everybody, the sons worked on the farm and they helped Dad out. A job of work was where you went somebody else's farm and did work for wages. You were the hired man. You weren't working for your dad. That was a job of work. And when I kind of ran the tape back on Dad, he would use it in that context. So I learned something there. He would also say, people like this, he was very sensitive to people doing things. He's not a bad guy, but the truth's not in him. And I remember doing some Bible study in church one time, and and I got that one, the truth's not in him. I said, Dad, you know who you're quoting there? I'm quoting me. I said that. Dad, that's Jesus Christ, Dad. Is it? Well, hell, it's true. The surest way to remain poor, said Bonaparte, is to be an honest man. And I was going to there's a John Prine song that's, well, he's one of my favorite musicians, but this thing, John Prine was talking about his granddad, and he was a carpenter, and John Prine said he was level on the level. I need to get a slide for that and meant to, but that was Dad all the way. He was level on the level. There was nothing. Now, he wound up as the head of purchasing for the Caterpillar Tractor Company from these humble beginnings, and there were 2 levels below him where they'd all been to college, and he was the only guy. And the company was one of the number 19th or 20th or 21st in the United States. And they did a lot of business, and he was the guy with the college education that was way up there. And he wound up as the head of purchasing for the entire company. And every Christmas around there, Dad would get a boxcar of stuff on the doorstep, and literally a boxcar. Things that would lay out there. He would send every single thing back, item by item, never kept anything. When we were in Australia, they would ship things in the company shipping. They had big containers. And they would encourage employees, you could ship things back from Australia to the United States. Dad wouldn't do it. That was the company time. It used to irritate my mother no end. All the other wives did it. It was fine. The company said it was fine. No, that's the company thing. Don't do it. He sent everything back. I don't think he ever took a paper clip in his life. I mean, I feel sure of that. And this one was the year before he retired. That was the 85 Bears. And all of a sudden, the Bears have been these doormats for all these years. And he calls me one day and says, I had an offer today. And it was, this is the Walter Payton, Jim McMahon Bears. These guys were the real deal. They had that wild defense. They're going to the Super Bowl in the Superdome. And I am a fun guy to go to New Orleans with and know a lot of the ground then, and certainly did in 1985. And I flatter myself that I'm a fun guy to go there with. And he said, well, what they're going to do, he said, I can take somebody, so I'm taking you. He said, we can fly down there in a private jet, and we'll stay down there about 4 or 5 days, and they'll cover hotel eating. They'll do this, do that. This is the only time he ever talked about this. And I said, well, Dad, are you sure you want to take that? Well, he said, I think I'm getting ready to retire because they're getting close to me. Because he said, this wasn't automatic, and I'm calling you to talk me out of that, because I actually thought about that, and I thought you might talk me into it, so I turned it down before I called you, but I'm telling you, they're getting close to me. I really thought about taking this. I'd really like to go. I wanted you to go with me. They're getting close to me. It's probably getting time I need to retire. True story. I would lose an employee. Somebody would quit. I was in despair. Gee, we'll never get this. This was a skill set. He would be utterly unmoved. The graveyard's full of irreplaceable people. The graveyard's full of indispensable people. You'll get somebody better. You could not tell him that. There's no way you can replace this guy. Gee, they have plenty of experience. I told Dad this one time from Aldous Huxley, experience teaches only the teachable, became one of his favorites. Gee, you'd had this experience. Yeah, well, you got to benefit from your experience. I called him, I wanted to do a talk, and I wanted to have me as a kid for some reason. I'm not an especially pretty kid, but there's a reason I thought I wanted to do that. Dad, I'd like a picture of me when I was younger. Every picture of you is a picture of you when you were younger. Well, yes, they are. I'd never really thought of it like that, but yeah. And he just said that every picture of you is a picture of you when you're younger. I always asked for that. And he was full. I went through some childhood thing with all of that. Don't tell other people your trouble. I don't. Don't do this or that. But one of his things I actually used with patients when you'd want to do, you had like this operation. And Dad would tell me this, you never want to take a fence down unless you know why the guy put it up to begin with. You tell a patient that on something, and that would strike home with them. They would, I see what you mean. And, he was big on experience. You could learn things out of the book and have some college, but he was big on learning it by experience. George Patton said, all war games, they're fine and good in their way, and we need to have war games. But don't forget, all real combat takes place at night, in the rain, in the creases between the map segments. He thought the experience was superior. So do I. So does. Most people are not really ready for the truth. Kurt Vonnegut, fellow Midwesterner from Indianapolis, I know people that went to his high school. I know the guy who owns his house now, said that truth's powerful stuff because you're not expecting it. This was Dad. Make a difference, go out, work. Amelia Earhart said that. No, there's more to life than just being a passenger. And you're skating along there on a way. Albert Einstein. Now, Dad was an authority figure to me for a lot of my life, and I had to get a little older to recognize what an authority hater he really was. He didn't like people telling him what to do. He didn't like people hinting about this or saying his behavior was anything other than exemplary. He didn't like to tell you who he was and where he went. Albert Einstein said this, and I wish I would have showed that this, God has punished me for my hatred of authority by making me an authority figure myself, and he was to me. And he would see the irony of that. Because I once heard him give this to reply to somebody he thought was getting too nosy. Well, gee, where are you going? He said, I am a tax-paying citizen of the Republic, peaceably going about my lawful pursuits. I don't think that's a sentence that I can improve on. This was another one of his. I didn't realize Mark Twain had said it, and probably Dad didn't either. You're looking for friends when you need them. You're too late. That's him. He respected work. I found this out when I'm doing things, but not just what he would call man's work. The times have changed. Things he would call man's work. He was very aware of people having to work, women preparing food, cleaning up. That was work that had dignity. And I'm sitting at home, you finish some meal, you think this stuff all happens by itself? Do you think that happens by itself? You think that pick that up? Your mother does all that. You ought to help her more. You ought to this, you ought to that. She would not ever make you do that, but you pick that, you drop something, somebody's got to pick that up. That didn't happen by itself. Show a little appreciation, show a little respect. These people are working, they're pulling their weight. Respect is from that. Now, I got into this, I had a apartment in Chicago that was very nice. It was nicer than I could afford because I was getting some assistance from elsewhere. And I had to, circumstances that are interesting to me but no one else, I had to break a lease up there to get another better opportunity or something for school. And so my mother comes up. We had moved a lot when I was a kid because of the nature of his job. Caterpillar, they liked him, and he'd get a promotion every year, every 2 years, something, and we would move. And, you'd go to a new town, you'd do this, you'd do that. Well, Mom came up, and I'm not sure what she wanted. She couldn't believe I didn't know what she wanted. She said, we're cleaning this up. You don't leave people a dirty house. I've never done that in my life. I've never left people a dirty house. That's not how things were done. And I'm saying, Mom, this is a management company. They come out of New York City. They're this, they're that. I've got the damage deposit in there. They're going to keep that. Yeah, that's not the point. That's not the point. That has nothing to do with that. You don't leave people a dirty house. And she stayed 3 days up there, and it was a spotless. She's up in the, had step ladders, and she's up cleaning this and that. You don't leave anybody a dirty house, ever. And if you, that was that. So I don't mean to imply my mother is some kind of, to be just treated some bad way. And here was what I learned. These faraway guys sent me, and I tried to give it to her, and she wouldn't take it. They returned my damage deposit. These guys I'd never met that were far away. And they returned that, and they threw in a little extra money. And she just thought that was normal. Well, I never forget that. And it's time to go back to work now. While you were sick, there's work to do. It's time to go back to work. Everybody contributes. Work confers dignity on you. You're pulling your weight, you're doing things, and there is no work beneath anyone. One of the reasons you would get tempted early on when I was going through a craze of getting timeshares and condos, I didn't want to think this, because you'd get to the vacation house and you'd have Dad with you. We ought to let's go muck out those gutters tomorrow. We got so-and-so, we'll have some time then, a vacation, let's muck these gutters out. I'm not sure that septic tank is in the shape it should be in. We ought to get that done. Life grants nothing to us without working these other things, and this is what he'd learned. When I was lifting weights as a kid and I wanted to build the body up, and I'm trying to, run in the morning and do this and do that, and if I was looking like I'd slack, he wouldn't really say anything to me, but I'd mention that, and he'd say, all you got to do is remember what you want. He said, people want to talk about discipline. He says, discipline's remembering what you want. You're trying to get something out of this, well, go get it. If you let conditions stop you, now James M. Cain said this, and the postman always rings twice, but that's Dad talking. If you let conditions stop you from working, they'll always stop you. Dwight Eisenhower talked about the same message. We thought the opportunity to do useful work with some dignity is a character builder. It should be done. Now, Dad was also big on this. You'd be afraid of making a mistake. Yeah? Well, the only person that never made a mistake is the guy who never did anything. Don't make the same one over and over. But the only way to make no mistakes is never do anything. Sure, you make mistakes, this, that. And when you play hard. When you work, don't play. The interesting thing about this is when the work was done, you got up and you did your work first. But once your work was done, you were a free agent. You'd done your work. You'd accomplished the things you were set out to do that day. And now it's what Dad would call the cool of the evening. You sit back, maybe have a beer. He was a bridge player. Me and Mom, we'd have people over. My parents were very social people. But that was what he would call the cool of the evening. I've never heard that phrase since, but he would use that all the time. Well, it's the cool of the evening. Let's do this, let's do that. I'm going back to grade school. My parents would take my brother and I to Chicago from, at that time, Decatur, Illinois, and we'd stop in Mount Pulaski, Illinois, and eat at the Dog and Suds. This is where they used to hook the tray on your car, and you'd have these chili dogs, very exotic food that I really liked. And the first day, you'd go up in the Prudential Building, which was the highest building at that time, on the lakefront. You'd do that the first night, and then Saturday, you went to Shedd Aquarium, and you went to the Natural History Museum, Fields Museum, which is this now. On Sunday, we would go to the Science and Industry, get done, start when they opened, and get done in the middle of the afternoon and drive back. Or I say drive, I'm passaging, I'm not driving. And we would ride back. And so we're up at the Fields Museum Saturday. And this is what I, to this day, call the squid question, where you got to remember how important is the answer you get and what are you going to do with the answer. And you'd have patients ask you squid questions where you're privately thinking that's a squid question. They had an exhibition. It was 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, these old movies that were current then. And I said, Dad, how do you tell a male squid from a female squid? I didn't know. And his answer to the squid question, I'd never thought about a squid question. He'd say, well, gee, I don't know, but who gives a shit except another squid? And to this day, I think, am I asking a squid question? Who gives a shit except another squid? There are squid questions and not squid questions. I'm going to take Dad skiing. He's over late 70s, early 80s, and we're going out to Colorado. I was trying to get Marty and I, my wife Marty and I, were big on getting bigger on skiing, and we found it enjoyable. And I started, you couldn't be any worse than I was when we started. And I looked like a total cow on ice for the first year out there. But after the cow on ice phase faded away, thank God, I got where I could enjoy it kind of in my way. And it was fun. So Dad, we're going to go. He wants to go. My parents are late 70s. And let's go. Let's see what that's like. Well, about 5 days before that, on the land I bought him, he slips and he breaks his leg. We're going to go to Colorado and ski. And I remember him saying, he calls me, he'd gotten somewhere, and I said, well, now we're going. We paid for this with so-and-so. I know I could try this. They've got to have rigged something with this. And so he's got his crutches, and he's got his cast, and we're headed out there on the airplane. So I said, where did this happen on the land? He said, it was down by the big woods, what we call the big woods, down in that little graveyard that we had. I owned a graveyard and didn't know it, down the bottom. It's kind of spooky. Found it one winter walking through there, pheasant hunting, and you're in a graveyard, in an old graveyard. And he said, it was right down in there. And I said, there were no this is before cell phones were in general use, and he didn't carry one. And I don't think they really existed. You had to go to a phone booth. So I say to Dad, but is there anything you could do? He said, well, I did what I could do. Hell, I could stay out there and freeze to death. So I walked back to the truck. Well, that was about 3/4 of a mile away from where he'd parked. He said, yeah. Well, gee, could you call me? Yeah, I could. Well, if you could send somebody up there, what in the hell are you going to do? How are you going to tell them how to find me? Look for the buzzard circling, which is why I had those buzzards on that slide. That one stuck in my mind for years. How the hell are you going to find me? Look for the buzzard circling. So he'd gotten back to, got in the truck and drove himself to the hospital and had that leg set and came on down. Now, it was a fibula, not the tibia, but I imagine it hurt, just hurt one at once, and he'd broken it. So I say to him, you walked to the truck? Yeah, I walked to the truck. Well, gee, didn't that hurt? Hell, yes, it hurt. What do you think? It hurt? Yeah. Hell, yes, it hurt. It hurt. We're looking for a meal, and I take him in the Aspirin Hard Rock Cafe. That was really the only thing open that was close to us, and I didn't want to walk him that much. He had to go up a flight of stairs. He didn't want me to help him up the stairs, but I kind of tried to do that without that. It was a good Aspen Hard Rock Cafe. So there sits my dad. This is when this was a little more countercultural than it's become, and now we're the culture. And so here's Dad sitting in the Hard Rock, which is part of some private enjoyment to me. And there he is, and we got the rock and roll up in there, and pictures of people on dope. And so there he sits, just looking around there, communism all around him, Well, he thought he'd order the burger there. And on the way out, and this was to me an illustration of open-mindedness and ability to adapt, on the way out, he says, it's a good restaurant. He said, they had this, that was an excellent burger, it's good value on the meal, and he buys himself a Hard Rock Cafe baseball cap. Played golf in it at the Peoria Country Club. That's a good restaurant. He'd talk about that, and they have good food in there. The next year, we had a trip thing planned, and I had something going on with work and had to change this with partners and things. And I remember calling Dad and said, Dad, I know you've been counting on this, and I'm really sorry I can't go. I've got to do some things at work. Don't you ever apologize to me about you got to do something with your work. I never want to hear that. Don't ever apologize to anybody, but especially me, about you got to work. You got to work. You got to take care of your business, and you take care of that business. Don't ever apologize to me about that. And this will instill, I don't know how good of a job I did with my own sons, but they're pretty good workers. William Buckley said that. Well, you get a feeling of accomplishment. Gee, why does he write these articles for Time Magazine? Well, the last one was the knowledge you hadn't been sitting on your ass all day. That would be Dad talking. I'm asking Dad about unions. He hated them. He worked for a guy that hated them. And I remember I'm doing something, trying to get a rise out of them with unions, and he said they have to have unions. I wasn't expecting him to say that. They got to have unions, or guys like me will take advantage of them. He said, it's a cold world. You got to have unions. Now, but the satisfaction I got was one of those dad phrases, it's a shame they got to be so lazy, corrupt, and shiftless. And it's just like you're in a time machine all the time. And I'm trying to write this down, lazy, corrupt, and shiftless. I thought, I don't know. I'd had the education. Dad is talking about that. I like to know things. But I remember talking to him one time and I trumped him on something. He said, you know more things than nobody gives a shit about than anybody I ever met. I'm not sure the reply to that, but I don't think I gave one. But then I started to do something else, and he said, it ill becomes you to use the education that I urged you to get and bought and paid for to belittle and humiliate me. I'd never thought about that, and I kind of said, gee, Dad, I'm sorry. Yeah, you ought to be. And left it at that. I didn't learn most of that stuff in college. I learned it reading, but I don't know what he thought went on there. Now, his default from not an easy life was the person he was talking to, and you nodded and were polite. He was almost courtly in his manners to other people, but they were probably full of shit. And generally, and that was the default, and until proven otherwise, you were full of shit about that particular point and probably full of shit in general. And you could get rid of that notion and you could become a terrific guy and you could be a real expert, but you had to show him something. And the truth is, this is Henry Miller talking from Tropic of Cancer. We're all cannibals and liars and things like that. This was kind of the full of shit thing. I get shot one time. I'm pheasant hunting with different guys. Dad imbued in me. I enjoyed it at that time, and it involved a lot of walking. And I had a stupid bastard shoot me. And it was an elaborate story that I can tell at another time. And basically, I was far enough away, and I was wearing a lot of clothing, but I was on one leg when this happened to hit me, knocked me down, I'm bleeding. I turned my face away because I could see the gun come up and thought this dumb bastard's going to shoot me. And when he shoots me, I wanted to get my eyes and my balls really away from how that came, and I cut up the side of my face. I'm glad I did that because the gun comes up and whammo. So I'm on the way home. I'm in the car, and I called Dad. And, gee, I understand you had that hunt there today. How'd that go? I said, well, I've had better ones, Dad. What do you mean? And, well, I got shot out there. Now, there's no I got shot out there. There's no, well, gee, what happened? How are you? Are you all right? How'd that? None of that. First thing out of his mouth, Jesus Christ, don't tell your mother. If I can convey one story that's got the essence of talking to Dad, that one's up there with the ones from being a little kid, And then, this last one shocked me no end. I was doing something with my boys, and I'm sitting with Dad, we're driving somewhere, and I'm driving, and we're talking, and he said, you're awfully hard on those boys. I have never heard anything in my life that flabbergasted me so much. And I'm sure I went to make some kind of reply, and I must look like some kind of goldfish with its mouth opening, shutting, and nothing coming out. I was speechless, at a loss for words. What the hell do you mean by, you're awfully hard on those boys? Well, Dad, there's nothing to say. You ought to ease up on those boys a little bit. And I thought I was being kind of okay. Well, 2 weeks go by, and I actually gave that some thought, and he said the boys had gone up in the country. I had bought a house for him in the country where he enjoyed living, and I had said, I send my boys are up there. And he said, 2 weeks ago, I told you were hard on those boys. And he said, they were a lot of fun. He said, they're good kids. They're nicely brought up, and they mind, and they're a pleasure to be around. So I told you that you were hard on them about 2 weeks ago, and I meant it then, and I mean it now, but they're good boys. You got this, and you're doing that correctly. Well, thanks, Dad. Well, you're welcome. So there was a little bit of recognition there. This is the last picture I have of him. He died when he was 97. He never spent a millisecond in a nursing home. He lived up there by himself. the neighbor lady had come in and helped him clean up about some things, but he had the kid that mowed the lawn. He had a double lot in the house I bought him, and I just hadn't taken his picture for a while, but this was taken elsewhere. He was visiting my house, or visiting my oldest son's house, and he lived to be 97. That's the last one I had, but he was carrying some groceries up a flight of stairs and fell over, and died there, and that was that. But I mean, he was a role model for me, and I'm glad I had him. Thank you.